Radhe Radhe. Mummy and I are here on Sunday, December 26th, 2021, during this Christmas weekend to present a recap of our Bhagavad Gita study session.
Radhe Radhe.
I'll go ahead and share my screen and talk about the few verses that we covered today. So as all of you remember, chapter 4, Jnana Karma Sannyas Yoga. We had the usual quiz questions and also caught up on a question, in fact, that I hope you all can revisit, which is covering something from a few verses ago. And then we got into chapter 4, verses 21 through 24. Chapter 4, verses 21, 22, and 23, they end off in verse 23 with a summary of the content from chapter 4, verse 18, all the way through chapter 4, verse 22. In chapter 4, verse 21, we just saw a very brief commentary paragraph on how we can act without sin. And that is really working without expectations, being free from expectations, and without a sense of ownership. We also tied in the word ownership to proprietorship that we have seen several times since at least chapter 2, verse 47. Again, the idea being that we are performing actions by or with one's body, but because we are not having any expectations regarding the fruits or the results, then we can work without incurring any sin. Chapter 4, verse 22 was about, again, the words equanimity and equipoise, being balanced, being sages of steady wisdom. But the key takeaways also were to accept all the results of our activities as some kind of gain. Ironically, although this is a verse that talks about dualities, we talked about dualities in the world, such as day and night, hot or cold, or in life, which is happiness and distress, victory and defeat. But here, interestingly, Sri Krishna uses the word gain because even if we get problems or obstacles or hurdles in our life, those are for our spiritual progress, and they come of their own accord. Our goal and duty is to put in our best efforts while we perform all kinds of activities. Mummy, I want to ask if you have any Sanskrit word we might want to take away from the verses so far.
Yeah, so from verse number 21, I think the word nirashiha. Nirashiha meaning free from expectations. This is a very, very important word that we all should keep in our dictionary, because this is what is going to lead us to equipoise and equanimity in life. Why? Because when we expect nothing, that means we have control over our desires. Once we have control over our desires, we are going to be in that equanimous situation where we accept both happiness and sorrow, success and failure, all in same stride. Okay, we don't worry about it. We take it as prasad from God. And another important thing I want to say is from verse number 22, we have to notice Krishna is saying, telling us to learn to accept whatever we get unasked. Means we don't have to ask God for anything. We just have to do our loving devotion, our service to God. And whatever he gives us, we have to learn to accept it. And another important word here, he is saying free from envy. Free from envy. That is something very, very important. And that word also I want everybody to look at is vimatsaraha. Vimatsaraha means free from envy. Now, envy is one thing which we don't realize. Somewhere in our thoughts, without our realization, we start comparing and comparison with others. And if somebody else has got something, we start envying that person. And that envy is the downfall of us, basically. So this is one thing from which we have to stay away. And very consciously, we have to learn to implement in our life that our behavior is free from envy. Vimatsaraha.
Yes, definitely useful to keep in mind. And in fact, as we move on to chapter 4, verse 23, is there another word you might want us to take away using the concept of free again?
Yes, there's another word, that is gat sangasya. Gata sangasya means free from material attachments. Again, this is what Krishna is teaching us. Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga means that we don't worry about the fruits of our actions. And that is how we try to stay away. We try to liberate ourselves from material attachments.
Absolutely. And I recall in class, you had also mentioned, Mummy, I like the thing about this verse, especially the summary verse, chapter 4, verse 23, also encompassing both Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga in this
Yes.
continuation of chapter 4.
Yes, right. Because here Krishna is telling us that the soul, our individual soul, that is the fragment of that supreme soul. And then our soul is basically a servitor. Servitor means it is always wanting to serve God and in loving devotion to serve God. So we have to remind our soul that that is what it has been wanting, and that is what it is all the time looking for, that happiness. And that happiness will come from the loving service to God. So we have to remember that. And once we do that, then only we'll be able to get away from the bondage of karmic reactions. So this verse 23, in this, Krishna is teaching us both Karma Yoga and Sankhya Yoga. That is the epitome of wisdom.
Indeed. And in fact, you were able to predict or foresee the word in English that I would have recommended to everybody to take away as important. Servitor, as you mentioned, both we as souls being the natural servants of God, but also the other meaning that a servitor is a devoted lover. In this case, again, our loving devotion to God. Finally, we covered chapter 4, verse 24. We called it again 6 degrees of Brahman. Brahman or Brahma coming up 6 times in the Sanskrit shlok, chapter 4, verse 24. And again, really in essence, everything, everyone, everywhere, it's all God. In fact, a lot of you were wondering maybe what is that kind of vision that each soul should now develop. Sri Krishna tells us in chapter 4, verse 24, that that vision is to see everything as God. So the examples given, of course, are oblations and offerings, the ladle with which the offering or sacrifice is made. Mummy mentioned the word yagna to tie it in really well to chapter 3. The fire itself, the sacrificial fire, is Brahman. And of course, the act, that entire act of making the offering is also Brahman. So we talked about briefly Jeev Shakti, which will come up in detail in chapter 7, particularly around chapter 7, verse 5. And we talked about the analogy of the sun as being an example of an energetic source or origin, and light, sunlight, the rays from the sun being energy, analogous to us as souls who are tiny fragments of God, the Supreme Soul, and as fragments of God's energy. We talked about similarly fire as well, the fire as the source, the energetic, as well as the particles of fire, which are the energy. So examples from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as well as the Srimad Bhagavatam, main takeaway, seeing God everywhere, in everything, and in everyone. Anything else to add, Mummy?
Yes, for me, this verse is very, very important because whenever at the temple we do some yagna, so I hear Panditji using this very often at the end of the yagna. And of course, I've learned this verse from one of the prayers which is done on Sanskar TV in the morning. So this is one of the very important verse whereby it teaches us, because this is the vision Krishna has for our soul to learn. Krishna is teaching us that we start looking at everything as God. This whole universe is created by God, everything is God. Whatever actions we are doing, they are for God. And so there are two ways of looking at it. One is the real yagna we do. That means the offerings we put in that is God. The ladle with which we put, that is God. And the whole yagna is God. And then there is another, the thing which we do in our lives, in reality. When we look at others, we look at them as God. When we do our actions, we do as offering to God. So this is what Krishna is trying to teach us, that we must learn that this whole thing is God. We start looking at it as God. And very important thing was Gantavya. Gantavya also, that the goal which we are wanting to attain, that is also God. So when we have that kind of eye with which everywhere we see it is God, everything is God, that is what Krishna is trying to teach us, that we should train our soul to become like that. And how do we achieve that? We are going to learn in future chapters in coming up, whereby in chapter 6, Krishna is going to teach us meditation. So meditation is the word whereby with what we really control our mind and intellect and reach such a beautiful, serene, steady state of ourself, whereby we start seeing God in everything. Brahmarpanam, Brahma Havir, Brahmagno, Brahmana Hutam, Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam, Brahma Karma Samadhina, that everything is God and everywhere is God, and we are trying for oneness with God. Thank you. Radhe Radhe.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And in advance, of course, continued season's greetings for everybody. And as Dilji also said, we shall now meet in the new year, 2022, Sunday, January 2nd, 2022, regular class. Again, Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.